I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out where to begin. Not because the memory is hard to find. It's right there, sharp as the day it happened. But because I want to tell it correctly. I want to tell it the way I was trained to approach everything that ever mattered, from the foundation up. My name is Raymond. I am 81 years old. I spent 42 years as a civil engineer in Columbus, Ohio. And in that time I designed or oversaw the construction of 11 bridges, 4 overpasses, 1 pedestrian viaduct that the city named after a politician who had nothing to do with building it, and more miles of load-bearing infrastructure than I can recall without looking at my files. I am telling you this not to impress you, but because it is the only honest way I know how to introduce myself. A man is what he has built, what he has held together, what he refused to let fall. My wife Eleanor died 2 years ago this past April. 37 years of marriage. She was a high school English teacher who corrected my grammar until the very end, and I am certain she is correcting it still from wherever she has gone. When she passed, the house we had shared in Bexley became a quiet I did not know how to fill. My daughter Caitlin called me within the week. She and her husband Derek had an in-law suite attached to their home on the east side. A good space, its own entrance, its own dignity. She said it made sense. She said she wanted me close. She cried when she said it, and I believed the tears completely, because I had no reason not to. What I did not tell her in that phone call was that I had been dreading exactly this, not the moving, but the needing. I had measured my worth my whole life by my usefulness, by the problems I solved and the structures I kept standing. I was afraid of what happened to a man like me when there was nothing left to build. But I said yes. I signed over a significant portion of my savings into the joint home equity account they had set up, because that was the arrangement. And because I have always believed that trust is not a feeling. It is a structure you build deliberately, with care, with the understanding that one day it may need to carry real weight. I want to be honest with you. The first few months were fine. They were more than fine in some ways. My granddaughter Maya was 7 then, and she had a habit of appearing at my door with drawings she wanted me to explain. Bridges, mostly. She had learned somehow that her grandfather built bridges, and she wanted to understand how something so heavy could hold. I would sit with her at my small kitchen table and draw load diagrams on the backs of her drawings, and she would watch with the kind of focused, unself-conscious attention that children sometimes have and almost never keep. Those mornings were the best part of the arrangement, and I want you to know that before I tell you the rest. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because I've heard from people all over the world who know this story. Not my story specifically, but this story. The one about a man who built everything and watched someone try to dismantle it. Derek is 44 years old. He is a regional sales manager for a medical device company, and he is very good at it. I say that without sarcasm. I watched him work and I understood his skill. He could take any situation and reframe it into something that served him, smoothly, almost without seam. He wore sincerity the way some men wear expensive watches, as a tool, as a signal, as something designed to be noticed. In the beginning, he was deferential to me in a way that felt genuine. He asked about my work. He laughed at my longer stories. He called me Raymond, never Dad, which I appreciated. I was not his father, and I had no wish to be. The change was gradual. That is the thing I want you to understand about what happened, because I think people expect betrayal to arrive like a storm, sudden, loud, unmistakable. This did not arrive that way. This arrived the way erosion arrives, almost invisibly, one layer at a time, and you only understand the full damage when you look back at what the ground used to be. It started at the dinner table. I would offer an observation about something in the news, about a repair the house needed, about anything, and Derek would let a half-second pass, just long enough to signal that the comment had been registered and set aside, and then he would redirect the conversation to something else. Not rudely, never rudely. With the kind of patient, practiced redirection you use on someone you have already decided is not essential to the discussion. Caitlin at first would glance at me when he did this, a small, apologetic glance that told me she noticed. Then, gradually, she stopped glancing. My offers to help with repairs were the hardest part of this phase. Derek began declining them with a particular kind of response that I can only describe as surgical condescension. He would say things like, "Oh, Raymond, don't worry about it, I've got a guy," or, "That's a lot of work, let's not put that on you." And the words were considerate, technically, but the tone carried something else. The tone carried the clear and unmistakable message that my help was an inconvenience being managed, rather than a contribution being declined. I am a man who spent 4 decades solving structural problems. Being told, in the language of courtesy, that I was no longer capable of being useful, that was not a small thing. He started calling my suite the back unit. Not to my face at first. I heard it during a phone call he was having in the kitchen. He was talking about the property, and he said the back unit has its own entrance, which is the main thing. And I understood immediately that the back unit was where I lived, and that he was discussing it as a spatial asset rather than as my home. I said nothing. I put on my jacket and walked to the end of the street and stood there for a while, looking at an oak tree that I had always admired. Then I came back. The moment that crystallized everything, the moment I will carry for whatever years I have left, came in June. Derek's parents came to visit for 2 weeks. I had met them twice before. Decent people, loud in the comfortable way of people who have never had to be quiet. Derek came to my suite on a Thursday evening and told me, with the specific cheerfulness of a man who has already decided the answer, that he was going to need the suite for his parents, and that he had set up the guest room in the main house for me. He used the phrase, space logistics. He said it as though it were a reasonable and obvious solution, a small administrative adjustment, the kind of thing that required nothing from me except compliance. I looked at him for a moment. He was smiling. He was very confident. And I said, "All right, Derek," because I had learned long ago that the moment of confrontation is rarely the moment of resolution, and that a man who shows you his cards too early surrenders the only advantage that matters. I moved into the guest room. I brought what I needed. I was polite to Derek's parents, who were genuinely pleasant and completely unaware of any tension. And 2 days into their stay, Derek hosted a backyard gathering. Neighbors, colleagues, a few couples I did not know. I sat near the edge of the yard with a glass of iced tea, watching Maya chase the neighbor's dog across the grass. At some point, Derek was telling a story near the grill, and I heard him say, with the easy laughter of a man performing for an audience, something to the effect that Raymond's still holding down the fort, and the laughter from the people around him landed on me like something physical. Not the laughter itself, the fact that it was easy, the fact that it cost him nothing. Maya appeared at my side within 30 seconds. She did not say anything. She took my hand, and we watched the dog together, and I held her small hand and thought, this child is 9 years old, and she has more grace than any adult in this yard. What would you have done if you were me? I am asking honestly. I have heard many answers to this question, and I understand all of them. But I want you to hear what I did. I did nothing. Not yet. Because 3 days after the gathering, my neighbor Gus, a man I have known for 11 years, a retired school principal with no particular interest in anyone's business, mentioned to me during a morning walk that he had seen Derek leaving the offices of a downtown law firm. He mentioned it the way you mention something you noticed, without meaning or consequence. He said the name of the firm. I recognized it. It was a real estate and estate law practice. I said, and we kept walking, and I thought about that oak tree again. Here is what you have to understand about how I was trained to think. When you design a load-bearing structure, you do not assume that everything will go right. You build in redundancy. You identify the failure points before they fail. You ask, what happens if this connection doesn't hold? What happens if there is more weight than we planned for? You answer those questions in advance, quietly, in the math, before anyone ever walks across what you built. I had spent 42 years thinking this way. I had never entirely stopped. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my estate documents since 2004, and whose judgment I trusted completely. I told her what I had observed, what I had heard, and what I suspected. I asked her to review the joint equity account documents, specifically the provisions and protections I had insisted on when we established the arrangement. Patricia called me back 2 days later. Her voice was careful, which is how I knew it was serious. She told me that Derek had indeed consulted an attorney about restructuring the joint account, about initiating a buyout of my share at a suppressed valuation, one that would have represented a significant financial loss to me and effectively removed my legal standing in the property. He had not yet moved, but the machinery was in motion. And then Patricia said something that I will tell you exactly. She said, Raymond, those protection clauses you insisted on, the ones about independent valuation and written consent for any restructuring, they're not standard. Most people don't include them. You're very lucky you did. I told her it wasn't luck. She paused and said, no, I suppose it wasn't. I had built redundancy into the agreement, the same way I had always built redundancy into everything. Not because I expected betrayal, because I had learned across a long life that the structures which hold are the ones that were built to hold, even when you hoped they wouldn't need to. Patricia filed the correct documents. She notified the appropriate financial institutions. She placed a legal hold on any restructuring of the joint account pending a formal review. She did this quietly, correctly, without drama, the way you reinforce a foundation, not with noise, but with precision. I did not call Derek. I did not confront Caitlin. I did not mention any of it to anyone except Patricia. I waited. Derek moved to execute his plan approximately 3 weeks later. I do not know exactly what he expected. Perhaps some confusion, some delay, perhaps a negotiation in which my position was weak. What he found was that every door he needed to open was already closed. The account was frozen. The attorney he had hired withdrew from the matter. I do not know exactly why, and I did not ask. The property valuation he had commissioned was deemed inadmissible under the terms of the agreement. His leverage did not collapse dramatically. It simply was not there. He reached for it and found nothing. This is not a dramatic thing to watch happen. It is a quiet thing, but it is final. Caitlin found out the way I had hoped she would find out. Not from me in anger, not in the middle of a confrontation, but from the documents themselves, which Patricia had organized clearly and without editorial comment. The facts were sufficient. I sat with my daughter at the small table in my temporarily returned suite on a Tuesday evening, and I did not say anything for a long time, and neither did she. She is my daughter. I have known her since before she had words. I knew what she was reading in those pages, not just the legal substance, but the shape of the man she had married, and perhaps had always known at some level, in the way we sometimes know things we are not prepared to face. When she finally spoke, she said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." And I said, "I know, Caitlin." I did not say anything else, because the reckoning she was facing was her own, and it was not mine to manage or accelerate. She had to decide what kind of marriage she had, and what she was willing to carry, and what she was not. That is not a simple calculation for anyone. I was not going to make it simpler by making her feel worse. I moved into a small house 4 blocks away in September. I want to be clear about this. I chose to move. I was not pushed out. The legal standing of the joint account gave me options, including remaining exactly where I was, and I chose not to exercise that option. Not because I was defeated, but because I was finished. I did not want to live in that house anymore. I wanted a door that was fully mine, and a kitchen that had no memory, and a yard where I could plant something in the spring and watch it come up without any particular weight attached to it. Maya visits every Sunday. She comes at 10 in the morning, still sometimes with drawings, and we sit at my table and I make her the same scrambled eggs with cheese that I used to make for her mother when Caitlin was small. We talk about school, and about animals, and about bridges. Last month she asked me why bridges don't fall, and I told her the real answer, which is, because the people who built them understood where the weight would come from. She thought about this very seriously for a moment, the way she always does. And then she said, "Is that what you did, Grandpa, with Derek?" I told her that was more or less exactly what I did. She seemed satisfied with this. She is 9 years old and she is going to be all right. I am 81 years old. I built things that are still standing. There is a pedestrian bridge over the Olentangy River that will carry people across long after I am gone, and the load calculations that keep it standing were mine. I was told, in the language of small adjustments and polished dismissals, that I was finished, that I was a liability, a logistical complication, a back unit generating no return. I did not argue. I did not perform. I simply made sure that the structure held, the way I had always made sure that structures held, quietly, methodically, from the foundation up. Here is what I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about this honestly, because I think it matters beyond my story. We live in a time that worships speed and visibility and noise. We assume that the people who act loudest have the most power. We forget sometimes that the most consequential forces in any structure are invisible. The steel inside the concrete, the calculations on the page before a single beam is placed, the quiet man at the table who has spent a lifetime understanding load. The most dangerous person to underestimate has always been the one who built things, who knows, down to the decimal, exactly how much weight a structure can bear, and who decided, long before you thought to ask, exactly how much weight yours would be allowed to put on his.